Hi everyone, welcome to my week 8 multimedia presentation on employee privacy with a question mark. Now, privacy is important. We have lots of information that we don't want to get in the wrong hands. However, when it comes to employee privacy, um, I don't know how else to put it. There's really not much of it that exists, nor does an employee usually have as much privacy as they think, um, which is exactly why the surprise, right? Whenever we go into employment, especially if it's at a higher level position, and especially in the public sector, as we're discussing here, um, everything we do in regards to our jobs and activities is considered public information. There's requests that can be made by the public, as we discussed a few weeks ago, for public records, and those have to be disclosed. If your email has to do with something that is regarding public policy or public just processes in general in regards to your responsibility or the organization, and it's requested, then that information has to be given, right? So everything we do at the workplace really doesn't have a lot of privacy. We are usually taught, just as experienced employees and managers, that we have to use separate devices. If we are on a computer, for example, right? We have laptops at work, and it's it's a good idea to have a laptop of your own as well, right? And when you are doing business or doing your work or work-related stuff, um, utilize the company issued or organization issued equipment to do so. If you have any kind of private emails or private information, keep that separate, right? That's a sort of a smart thing to do. With an increase in technology, as we know, nothing is really private these days. As one of the videos states, our information is out there to sell, right? There's a lot more information out there that we sort of freely give without even thinking about it, right? In comparison to the workplace. And so we have to keep that in mind in regards to everything we do, and try to understand that as employees, our first and foremost responsibility is to do our jobs, right? And if we do it right, then we can minimize privacy issues. So as I mentioned, at the workplace, everything we do is monitored, right? Everything from our internet activity to our jobs, depending on where you work. That there's cameras all around, right? Um, However, there is sort of a balance that needs to be put in place, right? As I mentioned, it really depends on the scenario, what type of organization you work for. One of the videos stated that employee tracking in regards to UPS employees, that does make sense, right? That during working hours, an employee is tracked on where he is because he is on the job, right, and getting paid to do that job. As far as off hours, I think that the balance right there is very obvious, right? After work, I don't believe it in any sort of tracking, and unless there is specific scenarios, like for example, if you're a firefighter or a police officer or a doctor, maybe, but then you can be on call, right, and be available and within a time frame, and that's mandatory. A policy for first responders and doctors. And so there are policies that could be put in place to balance things. As far as manager employee related sort of protections versus public transparency and accountability, um, as I mentioned before, there's really nothing that is private, especially when you're in the public sector. The things we do, the people we serve, that is the nature of the job, right? I mean, there are obvious privacy protection policies as far as being able to share our medical records, our private information as far as our social security numbers outside of the organization. Now, these things are already protected. Everything else, I believe, as long as there's a disclosure, as one of the videos mentioned, that you will be monitored in certain ways, right? Going into the job, if you know that, um, there's really nothing further to discuss. If you don't like that policy, then well, to be frank, then don't take the job, right? Then they probably wouldn't hire you, knowing that that's not something you would accept, right? And before going in, you do sign the disclosure, accepting uh, whatever policies that that organization has. Um, One balance I believe works very well, and it goes back to some of our readings. It's training, right? Um, Orientation, training, development, the relationships between managers and employees, right? These are things that could be a communication tool in regards to what type of monitoring is going on, right? Just beyond the disclosure, right? At least allow the employees to be aware of when and where they're going to be monitored, how they're going to be monitored, and even how the technology works in general, right? I think the more information we give as far as the policy goes, I think employees would be um, uh, a little more comfortable in regards to privacy. I believe a lot of the areas that are in contention or end up in litigation are training related. Sometimes the employees aren't aware, right? Or even, flat out, there's no disclosure of it, right? I mean that's an obvious thing to avoid. And so as far as um, social media goes, I think we all have responsibilities. It depends on the job as well, right? We hold the key to a lot of information. Sometimes in positions, we are a role model to the public. But in general, as public servants, we do need to present a uh, ethical actions, a good perspective on things, because that's a reflection of the organization, right? We serve the public, and therefore we need to act responsibly, ethically, and honorably. And so, if in one of the videos, if you were a teacher, and some of the things discussed in there as far as privacy and being thought of as her own videos. I mean, there's an argument for both sides, right? You know, Privacy isn't really private in social media, and so I think that's pretty much public information, right? Everybody knows these days, and so we have to really be careful. I mean, I guess sometimes we can play dumb, but at the end of the day, as an employee, you have responsibilities. It is important to be trained and to be aware of how you're being monitored. However, we have to realize that we hold a lot of information as public servants. We hold a lot of private information, right, of the public that we need to keep private and not share in areas that we're not supposed to, right? And so again, at the end of the day, employee privacy is really not something to be expected. I think it's something that needs to be made aware to the employee of how they will be monitored. And at the end of the day, it's really about communication. As long as the knowledge is there, then monitoring is part of being transparent and being accountable. And so with that, I thank you for viewing my little bit long-winded presentation. It's the last week, and I enjoyed everybody's presentation and being able to talk to everybody. And I'll hopefully see you at another course. Thank you.